Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and get started on this. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 2021 SMART series. My name is Bianca Rodriguez, and I'm the new Events and Programs Manager here at the Iowa City Area Business Partnership. This afternoon, we're joined by V from Astig Planning, and she will be talking about strategic planning today. And just to let you guys know, this is going to be a recorded session. So we'll have it posted on our YouTube page shortly after we finish in case you do need to leave early for some reason. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen really quickly and just a few announcements before we get started. 1 second. If I could find it. Can you guys see my screen yet? No. Oops. Okay, now.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so again, we're having V Fixmer Arise from Astig Planning joining us today. And before we get started, I just want to say thank you to our lead sponsor, who is MediaCom Business, for the support of this program. So I'm going to go ahead and just share a short clip from them in just 1 minute.
What's the measure of success for my business? It's the ability to keep serving my customers, keep evolving, keep succeeding under any circumstances. It's also having the right technology to restructure, reimagine, or reboot my business without slowing down. Fast, secure business Wi-Fi internet from MediaCom Business helps me achieve this, no matter what the future brings to my doors. MediaCom Business makes it easy for small business to do big things.
Oops. Awesome. So if you want to get in touch with MediaCom about their business internet packages, you can reach out to Terry Carpenter. His information is on the screen right now. And lastly, I just want to say thank you to our supporting sponsors who are on the screen as well. It is BRL Human Resources Consulting, the City of Coralville, the City of Iowa City, and lastly, Terry Lockridge and Dunn. We're really grateful to all of our sponsors for their continued support of our online programming, such as this one. All right, so that's enough of my spiel. I am done. I know no one wants to hear from me. So I'm going to pass it on to V. If you guys have any questions for her during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat. They're going to try to answer those questions as they come in. So please feel free to do so. And yeah, now I'm going to pass it on to V. It is all hers as soon as I stop sharing the screen.
Thanks. Thanks so much, Bianca. And thank you everyone for being here today. Excited to be with you. And I will hopefully share my screen. There we go. So yeah, today we're here for the SMART series. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of who we are. So Astig Planning, I have planners with me who do wonderful work in the world. We do community planning, environmental planning. My name is V Fixmer Arise, and then I'm also representing others here who couldn't be here today, Flavia and Jessica. And what we do, so we are bridge builders, and you know, people talk about planning. I wonder what they think. I usually think they think weddings or financial planning or something of that nature. But you know, city planning is obviously kind of what we do, but it's working with community members and city staff or county staff or whoever it is, so decision makers, and trying to make those bridges happen. And sometimes those bridges are within the community, sometimes they're within, you know, the community and the county. And so we try and facilitate conversations, host events, and in terms of planning, we do, you know, comprehensive plans for cities and counties. We do master plans. We do all of those planning things. But I think that we do it a little bit differently because we are, you know, women, queer, people of color, we're cultural, bilingual. We have a different framework for which we do our work. And that is really, of course, you know, looking at uplifting the voices of those who have been historically or structurally marginalized, and seeing how we can lift all boats in many cases, and have, you know, new perspectives and potentially new solutions and ideas coming from communities. So that's how we use our planning skills. We do planning, but we kind of have a different approach to it. And today we're going to be talking about one of 3 things that we really do. And I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Mural, or how many people are familiar with Mural, but I'm using Mural today. It's a fun little whiteboard program that you can use. So hopefully you can see my screen here. But so yes, we do environmental justice and community building. And like I said, we have the framework that which we do those from. And so we look at planning with the community resilience framework in terms of environmental justice. So we do brownfields redevelopment and you know, flood resilience plans. We also do community building, and we use community organizing tactics. So the frameworks of getting from behind our desks and massaging our keyboards and doing the data analysis, looking at parcels and things like that, to actually going out and, you know, talking to people in the laundromats or door to door or in the parks or, you know, wherever that may be. So community building in the sense that we go out to the community. Obviously, COVID changed that. It made us grow new skills, or at least, you know, now I have glasses to protect my eyes from the screen time that I've had. But today we're going to be talking more about strategic planning plus, and this is strategic planning grounded in a racial equity and gender inclusion framework. And this really developed because we do strategic planning for organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, and I keep getting asked to do racial equity training. And so we do racial equity training and, you know, gender inclusion work. And then with the strategic planning, I noticed that more and more these things started to really combine. And if you know, kind of think about it in the sense that if you're wanting the impacts of the work that you do in the world to uplift, you know, others that may be structurally or historically marginalized, then you probably need to do that internal work first. And if you're questioning that, then maybe there's an opportunity to start exploring that. And it can be very transformative within a board or a council of an organization, or staff and boards together working on this to understand the culture within the organization or within the, you know, city or county or whatever it is that maybe you have good intentions, but that rarely does that actually mean impact, you know, so intention doesn't necessarily mean impact. And so if you start with this racial equity and gender inclusive framework, then as we go through the strategic planning process, which is, you know, looking at all your goals and your missions and your visions and, you know, aligning all of these things, you'll have a framework to look at that and say, oh, yeah, you know what, actually that program that we thought was probably a good idea, maybe it's not. Maybe we need to rethink how we're serving the people that we're serving, because it's not actually having that impact. So with that in mind, you know, what is strategic planning? And let me just unlock all of these. Oh, I thought it was unlocked. Oops, just kidding. Okay, of course you have to have technical difficulties no matter what you're doing. Right. I don't need to lock it. Interesting. Maybe ungroup. Okay. Oh, all right, cool. So what is strategic planning? It is really at the heart of it, looking inward to get those external impacts. And when we do that, we talk about assets and goals and timelines. We take surveys, whether that's surveys within your board, within your staff, your organization, or externally. You know, who are you serving? Who's on your Facebook? You know, should we survey those people as well? And then, get the timelines and the projections aligned with all of the information that we gather, and where you want to go. So that's pretty much strategic planning in a nutshell, right? You're really just looking internally to make sure that you're fiscally sound, and then also you're meeting the external impacts that you set out to do. So then, in terms of the strategic planning process, what we do is we take looking inward, and I am a trained yoga instructor, and so we look inward and embody our experience. So often we are caught in our heads and our brains, and thinking our way through to find solutions, when really our intuition is being stifled, and meditation can really kind of not only drown out like the chaos, and bring us back to our center so that we can make clearer decisions, but it also allows an inward gaze so that we can say, yeah, I'm part of this organization. What do I bring to it? Because we all know that we don't just like check everything at the exit sign when we come in, right? So what am I bringing? So that looking inward, and then that external impacts, you're able to, like I said, sort of have clarity and trust in your intuition, to move forward, to make those external impacts. So that's why we add this framework of racial equity and gender inclusion. And then we take all of the strategic planning and we move forward from there. So I just want to pause. That's literally the process. I have other fun things, don't get me wrong, but I just wanted to give you an overview, like big picture, what this looks like, and just pause for a second and ask if anybody, I would say anybody has any questions. Maybe I should continue on to the minutia beforehand. I just don't like to talk all the time. That's really what that is. All right, so, okay, what does that look like? We'll get into it. So essentially we'd have 2 sessions. The first session is really, and you can't do it in 2 sessions. Let's be real. I can't, everybody be in kumbaya after session 1 in order to, get into our strategic planning process. But we do get some foundational frameworks established. So we look at establishing those community values. This may be something that this board or this organization has never really talked about in terms of assumptions and agreements. And what assumptions and agreements do essentially is it says, everybody comes in with this. Everybody comes in with an assumption that we live in a toxic culture. Can we agree on that? And this is all up for, by the way, can everybody agree on this? You have to agree to these assumptions and agreements. Can we assume that intent does not equal impact? Can we assume that we are interconnected and independent? So when you come into a board meeting, you're not necessarily thinking that you're going to be like talking about this kind of stuff. But I think that this is the real stuff, right? As humans, when we come into a space, what are we bringing with us? What can we agree on? And the agreements themselves actually are tools. So we agree to say that, I'm going to listen to understand, and then we can talk about what that means. I'm going to agree to confidentiality and what that means. It might necessarily mean, we can't gossip. You can talk about kind of what we talked about here, but you can't attach people's names to it. When we say brave space, not safe space, I don't know if folks have heard about that a lot, but brave space is really just noting that we can never create a safe space. But we can create spaces in which people can bring their authentic selves and feel comfortable in doing so. And when harm happens, we will respond with care when we can. I'm just giving you like a few to start here, just letting you know this is like a fraction of the agreements and assumptions that we come to. But I think this gives you a feeling for what we're doing. What we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're gonna, basically when something comes up and let's say Bob is out of line again and he's pretty much saying some stuff that is making everybody cringe, you can be like, you know what, actually, remember that agreement where we talked about, or the assumption that we live in a toxic culture? I think that some of the things that you're saying are kind of toxic. And in our agreements, we said that, when harm happens, we'll respond with care when we can. I'm responding and I'm trying to care for you, Bob. But it's like we need to unpack like what you were just talking about. They can be tools to go to, because I've had lots of boards and groups say, you know, like, but I don't know, you know, if somebody says something out of line, like, I don't want to rock the boat. Well, you don't have to. You can say, look at this agreement. We agreed that you would, if you speak up, you would also kind of take it, you know, if you find that you're talking too much, you also take a step back. So Bob, I think you're just taking up too much space. Like, let's take it back a little, or, you know, something like that. So you don't have to address the person necessarily. You can address the thing. They're talking too much, right? Are you listening to understand? We agreed that you would listen to understand. Those kinds of things. And what we also do is we provide a couple of these, but then we ask people, so what are some assumptions you want to add to this? What are some agreements that you want to add to this? So we build it, we collectively build it. And I think that this gives an opportunity for people to really kind of tune in and be like, oh, wow, okay, this is where we're headed, you know, we're going to be talking about some stuff. So it creates sort of a safer container for us to move forward and talk about difficult things, because that's basically what we're doing. And then we go into creating shared language. I'm not going to give you all the steps. I just wanted to give you, you know, some highlights of the things that we do. But, you know, how many times have you come in and somebody said, oh, yes, you know, all this stuff about intersectionality, and like everybody's supposed to know what intersectionality is. That is not the case. That's rarely the case, in fact. And sometimes people have different understandings of different things. So what we do is we just break it down and we say, okay, how about some of these big things? What does that mean? How do you define it? And people, you know, they stumble and they think that they know something, or they find something new. These are actual examples of literally what people have posted, and you can tell that they're not fully formed, and that's okay. You don't have to be fully formed. It can be something where, you know, it's a point of discussion. So like, what is social location? It's, you know, I'm able-bodied, I'm light-skinned, you know, I am a citizen. This is my social location, right? My sense of how close I am, my proximity to power. And we go through a lot of this, and there's readings that you can do too. We try not to do too much, because especially when we're working with boards, we understand people are volunteers, and we try and keep it as accessible as possible. We'll do podcasts, we'll do videos, just to change it up, and also to change it up for ourselves as well. I mean, nobody wants to be hit over the head with everything, but this gives us an opportunity to create shared language so that when people say something, we know what they mean. And if we can agree that these are what we're talking about, then it's just clearer. And sometimes people, you know, will get through a group and they will still be a little bit confused, or it's not as clear as they would like, you know, in terms of what is intersectionality. And so we'll process that. We'll give some examples. We'll, you know, provide some other definitions. But really, this is something that the group creates. Again, you can see this thread, you know, we want it to come from the people that we're working with. It does us no good for me, like what I'm doing here now is just like to talk at you, right? Like that, who enjoys that for 2 hours? So we create some shared language. From there, we have a reading by Tema Akun. I think this is going to be updated by her soon, but she has a reading on white supremacy culture, and it's really just goes into detail as to how white supremacy shows up, and then what are some antidotes to white supremacy culture, dominant culture. And here's the ones that she identifies. And from the reading, we don't go through all of them. We don't have time for that. But we just essentially kind of ask people, like, you know, what surprised you? What do you struggle with? Like, what do you feel comfortable sharing? We do small group work. These sessions are 2 hours each. And then in between, we have like an optional lunch for people just to kind of unpack what they've experienced, you know. But it's a lot to take in. But what I'm trying to say is that we try and break it up into smaller pieces. We do small group work. And then actually we do some journaling. So we'll have a journal prompt, you know, how do you see characteristics of white supremacy or toxic culture show up in your work? And a lot of this work, kind of how I identified earlier, is internal. So we take lots of pauses, you know, like turn your camera off and sit with this. How does this make you feel? And, I would come back and do some sort of grounding meditation so that we can embody all the stuff that's coming up, all the anxiousness, all of the sweaty hands, or whatever it is, like, so you can embody the response that your body is having, is telling you something. And can you listen in to hear what that's saying? Because so often, again, we're like, oh, I'm writing it down, I'm reflecting on it, that's good. It's just going into my eyeballs, into my brain. But how do you feel that in your body? And I think that that's some of the transformative work. Is so often we just walk around in the world completely dissociated from our physical experience. Like the change in weather may prompt it, but how often are we really like aware of the physical space that we're taking up? And so this is an opportunity to really hone in on that. And I think that is another thing that really sets us apart when we're doing these, is that it's not your typical like session. We do like guided meditations and things. But of course, once we kind of work through that session, and then we have kind of a, after a week, we have like a lunch to see, how are you doing? Just kind of checking in. It's not mandatory, but we like to offer it as like, if you have some things that came up for you, or you're still questioning, we can talk about it. And then the next session, the next 2-hour session, we will kind of come back together and identify some of the top things that people discussed in the work culture. So it's very specific, obviously, to the organization, and start there and say, there's an acknowledgement that this is some of the things that need to be worked on, or this is some areas of strength. This is people feel like comfortable, and stuff comes up all the time. By the way, some stuff comes out of left field. Some stuff is like, yeah, everybody knew that, so it's a very interesting process. But then from there, we can begin to have a conversation about the goals of the organization and the programs and policies of the organization. And this is very familiar to anybody who's doing strategic doing. So we do kind of a blend of strategic planning, strategic doing. Is it core to your mission? And we can and should do this. And then, people kind of move things around here and align all of the projects or programs and policies that they have along this. And then from there, we do kind of your typical, like, here's some low-hanging fruit. Here's some stuff we're going to put in the parking lot. So that's kind of where we go. And from then we can do like a 6-month and, 1 year to 2 years, and then like 3 to 5, we can do a timeline to sort of set those up. It's not necessarily, we don't get into the financials in these sessions. Typically the board or executive committee or whoever makes those kinds of decisions. We offer this as a template to say, like, okay, now that you have this feedback from, your constituents, your stakeholders, the board, the staff, the people that you serve, take this information. We've got somewhat of a timeline. How does this align fiscally for you? And so we're not financial planners, but we trust that you have that on your board. And so we kind of get you to that point. And of course, if there's any follow-up questions about that, that's what we do. So I'm going to pause there and just ask, actually, if people have any questions, because that's the whole peanut butter and jelly.
I think there's a question in the chat for you, V.
Okay, cool. I can't see my chat. Could you read it?
Yeah. So James wants to know, do you always reach saturation on assumptions or agreements prior to progressing, or do you revisit the collection of assumptions and agreements session to session?
Yeah, so we revisit them session to session. Yeah, because things come up. And sometimes, and it's everything is a draft. So sometimes in the middle of a session, somebody will be like, yeah, actually, I think we need to add that as an agreement or an assumption. And we do. And in fact, Mural, kind of some of the nice things about online, we will give that link and we'll say, if anything comes up between now and our next time, please add it. So that and we'll have a snapshot of what was there and then what was added. So that was a great question. I am going to do a little bit more after this. I just want to know if people have a question about the process. That was a great question. Thank you.
So I have a question regarding some definitions.
Yeah.
So can you explain a little bit more about brave space versus safe space? Just because I've only been familiar with the safe space.
Yeah, I think people, brave space is fairly new, I'd say, in the last like 5 or so years. So I think that the difference is really you acknowledge, by acknowledging that it's no longer that we're moving away from safe space, like I very intentionally said that people are probably used to a safe space, by acknowledging that there really isn't a safe space 100% for everybody. I think that that is sort of an antidote, a pushback to this idea of like a dominant culture saying, oh yeah, this space, we can make this space, because there's always going to be something that comes up. And so it's not really safe. And I think for a brave space, what you're saying, you're acknowledging is that we're human and that stuff is going to come up and we will do the best that we can. But by saying that at the outset, you're sort of setting it up, the expectation that we're going to be as authentic as we can coming into this space and protect that authenticity. So I think it's just it's a different approach. Yeah.
So that kind of keys into a question that I have. Hi, V.
Hey.
And everyone. So as I think of kind of this work and what you just stepped us through, like I think it requires a good degree of just openness and vulnerability.
Definitely.
I think relates to that kind of brave space, concept. And so as I kind of think about this in terms of, where it's appropriate to have your team go through this and where it's appropriate to have your board and what kind of things you need in place prior to entering into this work, knowing that, I think with our team, we feel pretty, every day we get closer to being just more open, honest, vulnerable with each other. But the board is a whole other story because, you meet once a month and people don't know each other as well. And, I don't know if we've yet created a really super, trusted open space. And so what types of things might you need to have in place if you're doing this with a board to be able to go to the deep end like this, in these sessions?
Yeah, you really bring up some great points. And I have had these conversations with literally every organization that we've worked with because it is very different. It's just a different way to relate to one another on a day-to-day basis versus once a month, as you said. So kind of a two-part answer to that. We recommend, it really depends on the organization, but typically I'd say 95% of the time we're doing separate sessions with board than we are with staff. Lately, we've done some together and wow, right? You got a lot of different power dynamics in there. And I think that it was messy. And I think it really broke down some barriers. I think that there was some real communication and misunderstanding that we were able to kind of, break down those barriers. The other thing I'll say too, particularly with like, let's say you're a board and like, how do you prepare a board coming in and doing this? I think that, so this training is not a one-off. And so I think developing a culture, and maybe this is the starting point to develop the culture that like people are continually learning about, the like racial equity or gender inclusion, whether that's reading a book together or podcasts or, that it starts to create a culture where people are sharing those kinds of resources, having those conversations. And like I said, maybe this is the beginning, for people to start that. And that is why it's so important to do assumptions and agreements up front. Confidentiality is key in that regard, because if you don't feel comfortable, and that's why I said that thing about gossip, I mean, we're humans humaning. And so like, we just put that out there. Like, you can't talk about like who said what. You can talk about kind of what was discussed in general and like your personal experience. But I think that people won't feel comfortable unless they fully believe that they are going to be able to have that confidentiality. And then whatever, we're humans. But you're putting that out there, that like, that's the starting point. So I don't know I hope I answered your question. I mean, I think that those things are very important and something to definitely consider. I will say the board staff session that we ran was like, it was really intense. And like I said, it had really impactful shifts that happened, that are still happening. I mean, and I think what was really interesting was that staff were already doing a lot of this work, and they were really frustrated that the board was not doing this work. And so when we kind of got them in the same room, it was like, it just opened doors, I think, when people were like, oh, you all did that training? Like, oh, I didn't realize, or, people are rattling off like what implicit bias is, and board were like, oh, okay, like we have this, we have this in our own organization, like people are, so there's a lot that can happen unknowingly. But yeah, if there are no other questions, and I love questions, this is a very messy process. I think that one of the agreements that I love, and I'm surprised I didn't put it up here, was embracing the messy. Perfectionism is actually like one thing that Tema Okun really talks about with white supremacy, that there's this like ideal of perfectionism that we uphold ourselves to, that is actually like a harmful myth, because then we're just like pushing ourselves beyond our limits, or we're not honoring our own boundaries, or all of these things in this idea of like, well, we got to get the project done, or we've got to do this thing. So embracing the messy is really one that I love, because it does get messy when we start talking about this kind of stuff. It's like, I might not have a fully formed thought, but I know that there's something here, like what you said, there's something about that really I didn't understand, or I'd like to know a bit more about, or something. And to leave room for that is really powerful, because when was the last time anybody had that space? And that kind of gets back to the brave space that you're asking about. It's being able to be vulnerable. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, embodied practice is really something that is a big part of this, as I think I've mentioned. And just to reiterate, the embodied practice of it is important, because we so often think our way through, but you do have the rest of your body, and it's very smart. It's beating our hearts, it's pumping our blood, it's walking us around, or digesting our food, whether we think so. There's an innate intuition and wisdom in our bodies that I believe when we do this process, tapping into that really helps you make clearer decisions, because then those exterior pressures start to fall away, or these mythologies start to fall away, because you're really in tune with who you are and what brought you here, and also your connection to others. So with that, I would like to invite you all, if you are comfortable, to join me in an embodied practice. So feel free to turn off your screens, and find a comfortable seat. Maybe that's on the floor, or the couch, or the bed, or wherever you're seated. And if you're comfortable closing your eyes, please do so. If not, feel free to lower your gaze. And I invite you to wiggle your toes, find the points at which your seat is connected to the earth, where your feet are grounded. Taking an inhale, just Shrug your shoulders, and then as you exhale, roll those onto your back and just let it go. As you inhale, feeling the breath enter your body. Exhale and relax. Inhale and notice how the breath is breathing you as it enters your lungs and expands your chest, and then exhale. Noticing your feet on the ground as your awareness travels up your calves and your knee, your thighs, your sit bones, your lower back and belly, your shoulders, all the way down to your arms and hands, fingertips. Letting your awareness travel up your neck and your cheekbones, backs of the eyelids, up through the crown of your head. Noticing any sensation in your body, perhaps a gentle vibration, a heartbeat, your breath. And as you become aware of your body and your life force, really tapping in to who you are, tapping into that innate being that is doing the witnessing. See if there's any sensation there. As you begin to do the work of examining inward, it's always good to take a pause and notice what's here, what comes up for you now. Perhaps it's the chatter of the brain, and that's okay. Feel a connection to your breath and your heartbeat. What brought you here today? What questions come up for you in the space of your being, in the space of your heart? On your next inhale, wiggling the toes and the fingertips, coming back to your awareness. Gently fluttering your eyes open or opening your eyes. Thank you for taking the time for yourself. You didn't know that you were going to be taking that time for yourself, but I'm glad you joined me. The practice, the embodied practice that we bring into this work is of utmost importance because, as I said, it helps us find clarity and make better decisions. And I think in this work in particular, which is, examining culture, work culture, or internal practices and policies, there's no more important work than working on ourselves in order to bring our full selves to the work that we do. And I get the honor and privilege of working with amazing organizations who already do such good work and who are really curious about how they can do better. So with that, I also wanted to provide some resources. I've been very fortunate to work with all of these people, Michelle Cassandra Johnson, Stephanie Ghost and Paul, and Tristan Katz. They do this work every day. And they have podcasts. And I thought that would just be kind of fun to put on there in case people wanted that. Dismantling Racism is an organization that's been around in the South for almost 30 years. They've now turned into just sort of a resource hub because they've been doing the work for so long. I think they're just putting the work out into the world. And so I highly recommend their website in case you need some resources. Obviously, we're always a resource. We love having conversations with folks about this type of work. And you certainly don't have to use our services to have these kinds of conversations. And it would be like amazing if, what you took away from this was enough for you all to either further those conversations and those practices, or begin to start questioning and having that curiosity. And I do want to emphasize curiosity. I think that oftentimes, I'm sure many people are fairly familiar with call out culture at this point. And I think that that's what people are afraid of. But I just highly encourage leaning into curiosity and allowing that to lead you. And again, harm will happen. And so we just need to figure out how we're going to respond to it when we can. But yeah, I don't know if folks have any other thoughts or questions. I know it's only 2:45, so I don't, want you to get back your afternoon minutes, but I'm happy to answer any questions or if folks have comments about any of the things that we've talked about. And I apologize for my kids who are losing their minds downstairs. If you can hear them, because I surely can.
I'll just say, thank you for stepping us through this. I think there's a lot to unpack here. I certainly have never, come across a framework that increase, or that, intersects and integrates, racial equity and gender inclusion in the strategic planning process. And I think this is helpful because I think, like you said, it's difficult work, requires a lot of vulnerability, but it's also like, where do you start, and, it starts with just kind of integrating it with other things, other processes you have, in place, like strategic planning. So we really appreciate understanding kind of this connection and how this, how this dovetails with each other and how this works together.
Yeah, and it does help, sometimes to have that third party come in because of all of,
Always.
yeah, always. We realize that that's the role that we play too.
Always. It helps.
So, yeah.
Because then, especially you as a leader, you get to participate, when you bring someone else in. I guess as I'm like rambling here, another question popped in my head in terms of like, if you already have, a strategic plan for your organization that you're working through and following, how do you then dovetail that, with your work or integrate it?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually do racial equity training. In fact, I have one tonight that I'm leading. And because we're so familiar with the strategic planning process and strategic plans, I feel like we can easily tie that in. And, I always say everything is a draft, and we're very agile. And so if there are things where you're like, oh, but, yeah, we have a strategic plan, but we'd like to kind of look into this more, or we have a little bit of the understanding of the racial equity and gender inclusion, but we need a strategic plan. We're always willing to adapt and evolve in ways that people need, because, the information is out there. We're just the facilitators. That's what we do, but you can certainly, you can intersect with it at any point. We just put this together because we kept getting questions. We kept getting people being like, can you do this racial equity training? And can you do the strategic planning? And then I was like, why aren't we putting these together?
Yeah.
Because they make so much sense. It's what I do for my own company. I wouldn't be doing anything here that I wouldn't do for my own company, and continue to do, continue to reevaluate and question and have curiosity about, like, I don't know, is that serving us anymore? Like, is that working for the people we're trying to, help or work for or whatever? So yeah, it's a really interesting and dynamic process. I love that we have small breakout rooms, groups that we do, the journal prompting, the meditation. Like, I think that so much of it is just like the pause, because in the pause, then you really get an opportunity to question and like reflect. And we don't do that for ourselves very often otherwise, really. It feels like a privilege. I mean, that's why people take yoga classes. That's why, you know what I mean? Like you have your like an insight timer app, because you're just like, I have to force myself to do it. But I feel like if you embed it really does. And I've experienced it myself, how clarifying it can be to just like filter out the noise and find out like what is real here, to move forward. So yeah, now I'm rambling.
And V, I just want to step in to thank you, because that meditation, I don't think I've been that calm and like centered for so long. I'm always just like doing different things and scrambling. So thank you. And also like thank you for being the one or like the company to bring this up to people, because coming from a generation and like a younger generation coming into the workforce, sometimes we don't have that brave space or safe space that you're talking about, because we're just not brave enough to speak about it, and vice versa. Like the people who have been in the workforce for a good amount of time now, they aren't brave enough, or they're just scared of saying something wrong. So just thank you for what you do and educating us all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, like I said, an honor really that we get to do this work. It's so transformative, and we get to work with really incredible humans who are humaning. I love saying that because I feel like we're so afraid of it. We're so afraid of our own failures or our missteps, and they can be painful, but what great learning opportunities. So yeah, it's always an amazing journey when we're working with folks.
Could I ask one question?
Yeah.
Rather than intersect this with strategic planning, I'm wondering if it shouldn't be the beginning where you develop a sense of continuity and thoughts on this to inculcate into your strategic planning process, so that it guides the process rather than just intersects or adds on. Or
yeah, I think that's a great point, actually. Yeah, I'd have to bring that one back to the drawing board, Larry, but you give me something to think about. Yeah, I could see that being very helpful. Yeah, I could definitely see putting that together, actually. It's so interesting because I feel like this part of it, in terms of sectioning it out, it really takes people so much time to like kind of digest and reframe how they're approaching this. I wonder if that approach that you mentioned would be a little bit easier to digest as we move along. But certainly, yeah, that would definitely be another way of doing it. That's a good point.
James put in the group chat, I don't know if you can see V, but he said perhaps even more upstream on brand, mission, and visioning.
Yeah, also true. Good point. Yeah, I should stop sharing. There we go. Now I can see chat. Yeah, upstream on brand, mission, and visioning. Yep. I think that absolutely 100% can also be there too. It can be all over, right? But yeah, it's a good point. And I think that when we do some of the strategic planning, we do that along with the mission and vision, but we don't touch much on the branding. But I see your point. Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Yeah, well, I don't know if anybody has anything else.
Yeah, if anyone has any other questions before I jump in really quickly. No? All right. Well, I'm just going to share my screen really quickly just to go over one last part before we end the session. So again, thank you to V and Astig for all the great information we learned today and for, that calming minute or two that she gave us. I was grateful for it, at least. Before we end, I just want to mention, like I said, a few more things. We cover a new topic every Tuesday of every month. So our next one at 2 p.m. will be on August 10th. And it is from the city of Iowa City. They're going to be talking about water management as part of their climate action committee, which is designed to get people thinking about how to make climate action or how to take climate action into their own businesses. So registration for that is now open. I will put it in the chat here in a second. And lastly, before we end, I just want to thank our sponsors one last time. Again, thank you to MediaCom, BRL HR Consulting, both of the cities of Coralville and Iowa City, and lastly, Terry Lockridge and Dunn. Again, thank you all for joining. And again, thanks to V. If anybody has any final questions, feel free to either email them to me or put them in the chat. I'll keep it up for a little while longer and I will send them to V to get those answered. All righty, everyone. Thank you for your
Thanks.
time.
Thanks so much. Great to see everybody.
Thanks, V.
Yep.